So we're going to start today with a quiz. I know you guys love that. Does anybody know what this is? Any guesses?
Thank you.
You're welcome, Debbie.
Memento, right?
Yes! See, I told you this sermon was for you. All right, so Debbie knows what she's doing. This is the mathematical equation for momentum, which is our theme for this sermon series. I think that there were probably a couple of other math and physics-oriented people in the room who knew that. So the little p stands for momentum. It's related to a Latin word, polare, I think, that means to force or to push. And one finds the momentum of an object accelerating at any given time by multiplying the object's mass times the original velocity or speed plus the rate of acceleration times the time. Okay, you guys got it? We're going to do a quiz after worship. I'm just kidding. So the reason that I bring this up is so that we can see that there are several different parts to momentum. And while some of it is what the object actually is, without this other half of the equation, we don't have any momentum at all. And that half of the equation, well, it's about movement, it's about distance, it's about speed, but all of that depends on time. Time and the passing of it and its relationship to movement, that's at the heart of what momentum is. And it can be easy to get that piece wrong. Easy to believe we don't have any time at all, and so to be paralyzed by trying to get everything done all at once. Easy to believe that we've got all the time in the world and get paralyzed that way too. That's why time matters so much for momentum, whether we're trying to bring it into being or to stop it all together. If you're not sure what I mean, I invite you to think with me back to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has just led a protest and has been put into jail for it. April 12th, Good Friday. On April 13th, the local paper published a letter from 8 white clergymen in Birmingham, Alabama, saying that the recent demonstrations were unwise and untimely, and that issues of racism and segregation should be pursued in the courts, and that in the meantime, all the usual laws should be obeyed. Perhaps you remember the way that Dr. King responded in his now famous letter from Birmingham jail. There is one part that feels particularly relevant when we begin to talk about time and momentum. He said this: "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every African American with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never." You see, Those white clergymen and Dr. King himself all understood that one of the easiest ways to stop momentum in its tracks is just to add more time and slow movement to a crawl. Perhaps another example of the relationship between time and momentum might be helpful, a more recent one. I think back a few years ago to 2020 when we entered a state of emergency, a state of urgency because of the global pandemic. And I know that for many of us, we still talk about that period of time as a time warp. Nobody is entirely sure what happened to all of those years. But it's also true that the language of urgency and the language of emergency made us feel and act as though we had very little time to deal with the problems confronting us. And one of the problems confronting us during those years was what to do for those in the northwest suburbs living without homes who could no longer find shelter in local churches because those churches had been closed due to the sheltering in place orders. And in that state of emergency, suddenly, from COVID-19 relief, from federal sources and state sources and local sources, there was money to pay for hotel rooms for those without homes in the northwest suburbs. So people who had up to this point been moving day to day from church to church now had a place that they could call their home, that they could return to every night if they left during the day. Somehow, declaring a state of emergency, talking as though there was less time, meant that we were able to find new, creative, bold, even risky decisions. But the fact that we did so in a state of emergency meant that that solution was only temporary. And when the emergency ended, we went back to doing things the way we had done them before. We take away time, and we might go a great distance very quickly, but without time, there's no momentum built, and those solutions aren't quite sustainable. Time matters when we think about momentum. We find a third example in our scripture for today. It's another story about another community facing threat, much like the community for which Dr. King spoke all those years ago. In this particular case, a community is under threat because a man named Haman has been offended by a man named Mordecai. Haman is a high-ranking official in the court of the king of Persia, and he's enjoying it. As a high-ranking official, he likes to be respected, and he specifically likes when he goes out the doors of the palace and people bow down to him to show what an important man that he is, just as the king has commanded that people do. Mordecai, on the other hand, is not a high-ranking official, but he is Jewish. And as a Jew, he is not willing to bow down to anyone but God. And Haman is not God. But Haman thinks this is a problem anyway, and decides that someone needs to be punished for it, or maybe even someones. And so Haman goes to the king of Persia and offers him 10,000, we'll say dollars, because I don't know what the unit of money was, but $10,000 to have the Jewish community in Persia taken out, killed every one of them, and to have their goods confiscated and plundered for the people in the towns. The king doesn't need the money, but he issues the order anyway. Sends out an announcement that on the 13th day of the 12th month of the Persian calendar, the people are to annihilate the Jewish community. And the Jewish community is not allowed to fight back. He sends out the orders to all of the towns in the country, and so Mordecai learns the news of what is going to happen, and his heart is broken, as you can imagine it would be. He puts on his sackcloth and his ashes, and he begins to wail to express his grief, and he moves through the city wailing until he comes to the king's gate. And that's when the queen hears about it. Now, Queen Esther and Mordecai have known each other for quite some time. In fact, when Esther was a young girl, she had lost her parents. And it was her cousin Mordecai who had adopted her and cared for her and raised her. And when the king was looking for a new queen, and Esther was taken to be part of the beauty pageant that allowed the king to choose his new bride, it was Mordecai who told her not to mention her heritage, not to mention her Jewish roots. And so Esther didn't. But whatever she did say was apparently charming enough that the king fell in love with her and made her his king. And so it was within the palace that Queen Esther heard that her cousin turned father Mordecai was wailing at the palace gates and sent servants to speak with him. He handed over a copy of the decree so that those servants could give it back to Esther, along with a message that, well, she really ought to do something about this. She sent a servant back with another message, asking what could she do? Because he knew as well as she did that if anyone were to approach the king without being invited, if anybody were to enter the throne room without being asked to be there, they would be put to death. Unless the king lowered his golden scepter and invited them in. Mordecai isn't going to take no for an answer, though. And so he sends a message back saying, Esther, don't think that you are safe because you live within the palace walls. You are not. And in fact, perhaps you have been made Queen of Persia for such a time as this. He's right, of course, and Esther knows that he's right. Esther knows that the risk is worth it because the danger to her people is so great. She knows that saving her people is the right thing to do, and she knows that she is the one with the power and the privilege and the position to do it. She also understands the urgency of the moment. And she understands that some things take time. Our spiritual lives being one of them. Perhaps you know this already. If you have ever found yourself in a position where you are already angry and you want to forgive someone only to discover that saying I want to forgive them doesn't actually make the anger go away. Not if we haven't built practices of forgiveness and reflection and prayer. Perhaps you know this already. If you find yourself setting out to do something in an instant only to have your plans pushed aside by difficulties and challenges, because you didn't spend time connecting with your purpose or preparing to carry it out. Some things can't be hurried, and our spiritual lives are one of them. And so it is that Esther sends a message back to Mordecai, telling him to gather all of the Jewish people in the city and to have them spend 3 days fasting on her behalf. And she and her servants, they will fast too. Now, it may seem strange to spend 3 days fasting in a moment of such urgency and danger. In fact, spiritual lives often seem strange. It's not ever clear quite what they are accomplishing. And yet, in those moments with that act, that time of fasting together, Esther accomplished any number of things. As she fasted with her community, she was reminded day after day that she was not alone, that they were in this together. She was reminded again and again of her purpose to save this community that cared with her and fasted with her and cared for her so much. She was reminded that her life did not depend on the luxuries of palace life. In that time of fasting together, she was reminded of her dependence on God. And she prepared to do what she had been called to do. And so the time of fasting came to an end. And Esther went to the throne room to approach the king. She took a step into the room. The king saw her. And he lowered that golden scepter. Thank goodness. "What is your request, Esther?" the king asked. And rather than saying, "Well, I'd like to have Haman demoted and his decree reversed," Esther asks for a dinner party with Haman and the king. Why? Well, because relationships also take time. Esther had been building her relationship with the king for quite some time now, but that didn't mean that she didn't need to be careful. If she had simply walked into the throne room and demanded what she wanted, the king might have felt used. He might have felt disregarded. He might have felt uncared for. He might not have trusted the story that she was telling. And so instead, she asks to have a meal. Because friends, building relationships with one another, it requires spending time together. Just time together. Where we show that we aren't out to use people and we're not out to get something from them and we're not even out to fix them or to help them. We simply want to be together. Relationships take those moments of just being in one another's company, perhaps even sharing a meal. And so it was that Haman and the king join Esther for a dinner party, and once again, the king asks Esther, "What is it that you want?" And Esther, she asks for another dinner party with Haman and the king the next night. Why? Well, because truth takes time too. That night, the king is having trouble sleeping. And so in order to pass the time, he decides to read his diary. He calls it a book of records, but we know what that means. The king is reading his diary, and he remembers a moment years ago when Mordecai had saved his life, and he hadn't done anything to say thank you. And so in the middle of the night, the king remembers his manners, and he calls Haman to him, and he says, "Haman, what should I do for a man who has done something for me?" And Haman answers, "Well, you should give him one of your horses and have him led around the city and have him praised by all of the people, because Haman believes that the king is talking about him and is deeply disappointed. We might even say heartbroken when the king says, "Great, tomorrow I want you to do that for Mordecai," his enemy, his arch nemesis, if you will. So Haman spends the next day leading Mordecai around on one of the king's horses and having the people praise him. And you can imagine that he is a little bit grumpy when he gets to dinner with the king and Esther that night. But the king is right where Esther needs him to be. You see, he has been reminded of a moment when a Jewish man, Mordecai, did something to help him, indeed, to save his life. He has remembered a moment when a man from the Jewish community was good to him. It's an experience of relationship, even if only a small one. It's one that matters a great deal. And so it is, with a humbled heart, we might say, that the king comes to dinner that night. And as they are eating, he asks once again, "Esther, what is it that you want?" And this time Esther is ready to speak the truth that risks danger if the king gets angry at what she says, to tell the truth about what is going on. "I want my life," she says, "and the lives of my people, for there's a plot against us to kill us all." The king is immediately furious. "Who created such a plot?" the king says. "Who did this thing?" And Esther once again tells the truth. "This foe and enemy, this wicked Haman," she says. And with that, and another decree from the king, her people are saved. Now, that is an abbreviated version of that story. I would invite you to go and read the whole book of Esther for yourself to get the details. It's only 10 chapters long, and it is as fun as any soap opera. But the point that I want to highlight today is that timing matters. And friends, it seems to me that we as church, not just our church, but churches, we too often get the timing wrong. We are too often too fast at the slow work and too slow at the fast work. You see, momentum for momentum's sake, well, it doesn't help us. We need momentum that goes where we want to go, but even more than that, that gets us there when we need to be there. And that requires movement. It requires some sense of urgency. It requires the kind of boldness and creativity and risk that we sometimes only find in emergencies. But that kind of momentum, it also takes time. As we do the slow work of building the relationships and deepening our spiritual lives and coming to understand the truth that we want to speak. Too often, we get that wrong. Too often, we want to hurry through our spiritual lives so we can get to the stuff that looks like we're doing something, only to discover that when those tasks get too hard and those challenges get too heavy, we haven't built up the spiritual fortitude to withstand them. Too often we want to hurry through building relationships to say we are going to do work together with our friends at Parkway Gardens Christian Church or our friends in our community, only to discover when that time comes, we don't know each other well enough to figure out exactly what that might look like, or how we will work through our differences, or even be honest about what they are. Too often, we arrive at those moments of urgency when it is clear that there is a truth that needs to be spoken, or there is a need that needs to be met, or there is a working out that needs to happen. We arrive at those moments of urgency only to discover that we are unsure of what we believe is true, unsure of whether we have what it takes to do what is right, unsure of the people with whom we could work to do it. And then we begin to say, wait, I need more time. I'm just not ready yet. Friends, our world is in need of a church with momentum. Momentum in the work of love and of justice. Momentum that covers distances with boldness and creativity, willing to take risks, but also takes the time to deepen our spirituality, to build relationships with one another, to develop the kind of trust that allows us to be honest with each other, and to learn a fuller truth because of it. That kind of momentum, it means balancing speed with time, distance with attention. Or in spiritual terms, it means being driven by our passion for love and for justice and for peace, while being patient in the practices that will get us there. So today, as with our other sermons in this series, we want to offer you a challenge. On this table over here, you will find napkins. They are in honor of Esther's banquets that she had with the king and with Haman. And not right now, but after the congregational meeting, we want you to go and take a napkin, and on one side of that napkin, we want you to write something that you are passionate about, an issue or a problem that you want to attend to. And on the other side of that napkin, we want you to think about something that you need to be patient with in order to address that issue that you are passionate about. If the issue is racism, You might need to be patient with yourself as you learn to engage in dialogue with people who have a very different background and very different worldview. You might need to be patient as relationships are built over time. If it's hunger, you might need to be patient as you begin to get involved with organizations that address hunger, volunteering with small ways before you move on to volunteering in big ways. We invite you to think about what it might look like to balance your passion with your patience as an individual or as a church, as we build momentum in our lives. Amen.